Start recording. And the session is now being recorded. We don't need to hear the domestics every time, you see. This is why I press the button now. So lovely to welcome you both, Peter, Sarah. Lovely to have you here. We've got a lovely, busy audience. I hope you've seen the chat. They're from all over the place, and they all seem to be quite sunny. So this is good. It's nice to hear. What's it like where you guys are?
Well, I'm in Yorkshire today and it's a bit cloudy.
I'm also in Yorkshire, a slightly different part to Sarah, and it's cloudy and a little bit chilly. So yes,
Uh,
lovely. Standard Yorkshire weather, I think.
exactly. If it's not raining. Yeah. Okay, I will hand over to you two guys. Getting a bit of an echo from one of your microphones. I'm not quite sure whose that is.
Well, I'll speak first, and you can see if it's me.
I think it's you, Peter. If we can just check your microphone, there should be an option to, in the settings, have a look. Just have to keep an eye open for it.
I can switch to a headset if that works better.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah, Susan's suggesting maybe use headphones, perhaps, if that's possible.
Sure. Okay. I'll just grab a headset and come back into it. I'm sure Sarah
No
can chat a little
problem.
bit for a moment.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Well, great to see so many people here today. I don't know how many people attended the seminar at Learning Technologies. It was certainly a very busy one for us, so I don't know how many of you have come back to see it in webinar form, but it would be really great if you could put that in the chat and we can see who's heard a bit of this before and who it's a new day for.
Brilliant question. I'm really interested in the chat. Tell us why have you come to this one today? Why have you come to this webinar today? It's really useful for us to find out. Hi, Elaine. Nice to see you. And Lisa in Staffordshire. Please do tell us why have you come here today? Why are you here? I'm interested. Why have you turned up today? It would just be useful for us to find out. How you going there, Peter? Any good?
Well, let's see. Does it sound better?
Your voice sounds better and I'm not getting any echo. This is fabulous. Brilliant. I will turn myself off because you don't need to see me. Here we go. But excellent. I love this. We've got people. Look at this. I say to people, tell us why you're here. And look, people already telling us, look at this. Isn't this cool? Isn't this a nice community? I love this community.
It's marvelous. Well, let's hope we can bring some kind of beneficial insights to all the requests that they're putting in place then. Okay, well, I guess we start with a little bit of context for this, which is it comes down to data and content, of which you will be aware there's lots of out there. So, how much data exists on the internet? Well, obviously, you're probably aware there's going to be a lot. Estimated that the big four have got around 1,200 petabytes of data. I'm going to start using some weird data-related terminology here. So, but in real terms, that's 1.2 million terabytes. I won't read out the gigabytes. You can read it on the screen. It's a lot. So that's just kind of how much just the big four they reckon that they actually store currently. Global amount of data held in 2024 estimates about 149 zettabytes. I am not making these up, honestly. These are real terminology used. So 149 zettabytes, which is an enormous number of gigabytes, which is something that we probably can relate to. So to you and me, to real people, I have some context, and it's about an equivalent. If you're a bit older, then you'll guess it as 250 billion DVDs, or if you're more used to streaming, or both, then it's 250 billion movies streamed at standard definition. So that's a lot of Netflix. I know it's a lot of content that's out there. In terms of Google themselves, they have 1.2 trillion searches per year, which is about 3.5 billion searches per day. So there's a lot of people looking for content out there, but whether that content's good or not is another matter. And there are about 5 billion videos watched on YouTube every day. When I did the seminar of this, I asked the question of like how long it would take an individual person to watch every single video, and the answer is 17,810 years. So you might think, well, okay, so there is a lot of data out there. There's a lot of content. So why is it relevant? Why is it relevant for learner engagement? Well, it's clear we've got a bit of a content overload going on at the moment. So everything to everyone, there's lots and lots of stuff out there, and it's not always in the right format or relevant or engaging to people that are out there wanting to do learning. what we also define as micro learning and social learning have evolved substantially from where we were. And curation and personalization of learning content will become increasingly important, as we're probably seeing, algorithms on all the kind of like content that are pulling out there. The title of this is around TikTok and Gen Z, and those algorithms are really, really important. So what I want to do is kind of look at some elements of L&D. Be interesting here, if we're going to talk about social platforms, and this is a question for the chat really. What kind of social platforms do you actually currently use? There's obviously a lot of them out there. There's LinkedIn, there's TikTok, there's Facebook, so on and so forth. There's a huge list. So post in the chat what kind of social tools you're actually using at the moment. What platforms are actually in use? Be interested to see how they come through.
Be really interesting to see which people use. Oh wow, look at this! Oh, I love this. Oh, I love this. I have a list of the ones that I think. Facebook's going to be there, which sort of like dates me. LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, X, YouTube. I'm a big fan of Blue Sky at the moment. I really do like Blue Sky. But I'm seeing the Udemy. I'm seeing what else? I saw another one there, which Discord. I'm seeing Discord. I'm seeing Substack as well. People using Substack. Which are the other social ones you use? This is really interesting. Which social platforms do you use for chat? Please keep putting them in the chat. Please, Peter, carry on. But yeah, let's just have a look and see what people use internally. Barry, it's also externally as well, because part of the assumption is we assume people use social platforms just internally, but most of my learning happens from external platforms. So I think there's an interesting balance between the two. Please, Peter, carry on.
Yeah, it is interesting looking at the results coming through there. There's a real kind of spread, some in there that I wasn't expecting to see as well. So that's cool. All right, interesting. So let's just take a look at from a learning perspective then. So some things are constants, I think, consistent needs and wants that are coming through. So we're going to take a quick look at the global sentiment surveys that come through kind of LearnTech, and I think there's some interesting things in here. So obviously you can see that we've got highlighted in yellow, we've got our micro learning, which has shifted down slightly over the years in the last kind of 10 years. Originally it was up there in the top 5, stayed in the top 10 in 2021, but this year it's still managed to cling on to into the top 10. But obviously the big difference this year is that we've got artificial intelligence, which is driving everything. Everybody's talking about it. It's the hot topic for everyone. So the heavy percentage is up there, and it's not really a surprise. The other thing that I find interesting on here that we're not highlighted is about social learning as well, which this kind of like was really, really important in 2016, still was in 2021, and yet slipped down in 2025. I think, yeah, Sarah, what's your thoughts on this?
I think it's quite interesting that that social learning was a thing in 2016. For me, it was lunch and learns. You'd regularly be invited to have a lunch and learn, which was 30 minutes to be told something new in a large organization, and then you'd kind of move on from it. So very, very different from 2021 and certainly 2025. So that kind of social learning, a bit more than water cooler or coffee machine, but the lunch and learns. So quite different.
Yeah, I think it's how people would absolutely be defining what was micro learning in 2016 is going to be very different to what they're thinking of today.
Elisa's just posted in the chat. Can you go through some of the ones on the right? If you just go back a slide just for a second. Yeah. We can, if you want to use the full screen on that, Elisa, you can click on the full screen button and that will show you. What I've also done is I've pasted into the chat as well for you the link to the Don Taylor's research, so you can see what all the results are. And if you go to his 2025 survey, which has got the list there, the first one, strangely enough, unsurprisingly, is artificial intelligence. The second one is reskilling, upskilling. So if you need to see it, you can do. And yes, Pernille, there'll be a link available for you to be able to get the slides at the end.
Absolutely.
Sorry, guys, cutting across you. Back to you again.
No, sure. I mean, I think it is interesting that the shift in kind of the sentiment survey is quite interesting. I always look out for it every year. It's always got interesting insights. Like it's kind of what people are asking for, what the themes are, and I think for me the messaging out of this is that whilst micro learning and social learning kind of like slip down the table, I actually think we're missing a bit of a trick here, because we're focused on AI, and you'll see why when we kind of get into the Gen Z kind of TikTok content. It will make a little bit more sense as to why this is here and why it's important. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about generations, because we're going to talk about Gen Z quite a lot. So we're actually going to talk about every generation. So this is another one to post in the chat for everyone. Comments. So which kind of generation do you most identify as? To give you a bit of a guide, if you're greatest generation, then you'll be youngest 98. So I'm not expecting many from that in the chat. Silent, youngest is 79. Boomers 60. Gen X 51 will be the youngest. Millennials are 29. Gen Z 30.
I've opened up another chat box, everybody. If you want to paste them into the other ones, please feel free. But I have a feeling we've gone too far. We've already we've opened the box up here. Goodness me. Yeah, sorry. You were saying, Peter, how old people are?
Yeah, so the Gen X 51, millennials be 29 youngest, Gen Z are youngest 13 at the moment. And if you're Generation Alpha, then you could actually be a baby. So we're not expecting the extreme ends of it. My expectation is will be Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z will make up the vast majority of this, with probably a few boomers. I think, Andrew, didn't you say you sit in the category yesterday?
Yeah. I am Gen X, but with a boomer body and a millennial mind.
Yeah. So I sometimes feel like
no, you're not the oldest, Julie. You're the most experienced. That's right. That's what you are.
Absolutely.
And my favourite fact around this one, around generations. So just for everybody here, in your organisation, if you take a graduate on tomorrow, they are younger than Google.
Wow.
And we just pause at that moment and just consider what that means in terms of workplace. I think it's hilarious when we think of this in terms of the generations. Because we talk about the generations, I think you're absolutely right. We need to recognise who they are, and the Gen Z and so on. And all the boomers are coming out. Absolutely, John. Yeah, we are. This is what we do. All the boomers. But we talk about these labels, but actually what does it mean in terms of the technologies and so on we're using? A Gen Zer, for example, a school leaver next year will be younger than the iPhone. And it's understanding the context that these are in, which I think is really interesting, because we use the labels and go, it's these people, it's those people. What does it actually mean in terms of technology? And this is why I think your session's so interesting today, because what does that mean in terms of stuff like TikTok and so on? Because it's not just the label, it's the technologies and so on that they come up with. Absolutely. And they've grown up with more focus on looking for content. Absolutely. They can Google anything. They can find anything out. I think that's a really interesting point.
One of the comments caught my eye, saying she's Gen X, but she's got Gen Z and Gen Alphas at home, so she's mixed generation, which I like that, because actually, to connect with that, Elisa, this is actually where I started down this rabbit hole. Is that I too have two Gen Zers at home, so this is where this started, about my curiosity about how they consume learning. So. Cool. Okay. Well, that's interesting to know.
I'm doing some really interesting work with the NHS right now, and the conversations are all about, well, how do we build application forms that work on a mobile phone? Because that's what the generation are who will want to complete a form, and they won't want to do it on a laptop. They'll want to do it on a mobile phone. And so you have to design it, and it's just that thinking around how how we shift the thinking on it. So fabulous. Let me go back to the slides.
I was going to say, I think the important thing is to realise that people who are digitally native have got a much smaller attention span. So if the app's not loading, or if something's not happening within a few seconds, they've moved on to something else, rather than keep trying. So it's important to just think about that.
You're absolutely right, Sarah. I was looking at this recently. Why don't we get introductions to music anymore? Because everybody's on Spotify, and people just start playing a song on Spotify, and if it doesn't start playing within the first 8, 10, 12, 15 seconds, people will skip it. Podcast introductions, it's strange enough, with a voice like this, I do podcast, and one of the things we're doing now is we're reducing the time on introductions for podcasts. So the introductory music, where it might have been 15, 20, 30 seconds, we're putting in about 8 seconds now, and then putting the ongoing voices and stuff on top of it, because the attention span is reducing. Digitally native, there's a whole conversation around that. Anne and Becky, absolutely, and we'll not go into it in here, but yeah, there is an interesting piece around whether it's does digitally native exist anymore. But yeah, well, there is a piece around that. We'll pass on that now. Back to you, Peter.
Okay, well, I guess this is a good point for kind of a bit of a survey about TikTok and Gen Z. Well, actually, we'll talk a little bit about it first, and then we'll go on to kind of who's using TikTok. So this is kind of where it started for me, was in this area, focusing on TikTok. So TikTok's been a huge kind of rise. It's a global phenomenon, really. Fastest growing social media platform, 1.5 billion active global users, expanded rapidly. Demographic is heavily weighted to younger users, kind of 78% under 39. So that's a heavy kind of demographic on the bottom end. And actually, nearly half of that are Gen Z. So another interesting stat that came out of this, 67% of 18 to 90-year-olds use TikTok every single day. And this is probably the factor that really kind of opened the box for me, the proverbial can of worms, was almost 50% of Gen Z search for informal learning on TikTok rather than using normal search engines. So we just made reference to Google and saying they know how to Google everything. Actually, 50% of Gen Z users use TikTok for informal learning searches, which is a crazy figure. And one thing I think about TikTok that is really done and seen the changes, there's a lot of people have been talking about social platforms they use. TikTok's kind of the way it's delivered in that short form video has actually kind of had an impact on other more established apps like Instagram and YouTube. So we've seen on Instagram Reels and we've seen on YouTube Shorts. These are things that have kind of come onto the platform since TikTok started learning, and now they're kind of like heavily used. But Julie, I can't get past the name. Is it just me? No, it's not just you. I did download and kind of play with TikTok quite a while, and it is pretty cool. But yeah, it's very easy to, what's the term, doom scroll on it. So I tend to not use it and use it for very specific purposes. So let's, now we've talked about TikTok, is this a good time for a poll, Andrew? Okay, so this is just about who uses TikTok. What do you actually use it for? And it also gives you the option, the fact that you don't use it.
Oh, wow. We can see the live results, and the live results are coming through. And for yourself, so about a quarter of the audience so far, thereabouts, the people who responded, that is, for learning, 0. For both,
That's interesting.
5%, and don't use it, 70% of people don't use it. I'm really interested. Wow, what's your thoughts?
That is interesting. That's a substantial. Again, I think part of this might be the demographic of our audience, actually, because as we've just seen from the statistics, show that the heaviest part of the audience is kind of Gen Z. So the Gen Zers may be making up the. We might be getting a kind of live poll of generations here. Maybe it is interesting though that nobody, and there's literally nobody, has voted for learning on there. That's the most interesting stat, I think.
I think what that, I don't know, Sarah, I mean, you tell me, it suggests to me it's not a learning tool.
But I think it is.
I don't know.
I think
it is perceived as a learning tool. Go ahead.
I mean, there's a few people who have said they use it both for themselves and for learning, but only a small number in the poll. So, as Peter says, maybe there are Gen Zers who are in the call today. So, I'm Generation X, hands up, and I have used TikTok in the past, particularly in lockdown. So I don't know about everyone else, but we all did that. We all did the TikTok dances. We all learned how to dance from it, which is interesting. But I think the fact that now you can use TikTok to find out how to do something, how something works, is very different from both the manuals that we might have had before, or even the YouTube, the slightly longer videos that were on YouTube. So it is interesting. But from our evidence, it's very much how younger people would like to learn. Strange stat here. I remember talking to a young colleague about a restaurant she was going to, and I said, "Oh, how did you find out about it? Did you know someone who'd been there?" She said, No, I saw it on TikTok. I will only go to a restaurant where I've seen something on TikTok, and that kind of blew my mind, I have to say.
Wow. Okay. I'm loving the chat, by the way.
Yeah.
Awesome chat. Really interesting. YouTube, people use YouTube, and we seem to trust YouTube more. I think you, Dan, Roddy, you put in the chat, you said you don't trust it. Do you trust YouTube? And why would you trust YouTube more than TikTok, Dan? Please feel free, let us know. But a lot of people talking about TikTok, a lot of people talking about, YouTube, a lot of people talking about YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. And it's really interesting. Has anybody else noticed in the last week or so, LinkedIn is now taking videos as well? It seems video's the way forward. Interesting. What's your thoughts, guys?
I think it's short form video is the key. I mean, the fact that, looking in the chat, people are saying they go to the kind of YouTube shorts and Instagram Reels, which is kind of the point I was making, that those didn't exist before TikTok. Really, they were not really used, not really a thing. Now they're absolutely kind of taking center space. I mean, you go to the front of YouTube now, and literally, it's like about the third thing down is shorts. It's there. It's pushed on the front page. And and if you look at Instagram, I use all these, by the way, so I kind of know my way around them. But on Instagram, on the app, literally, it's a button. It's one of the buttons for Reels to get the short stuff. And I think it's becoming increasing that clearly social platforms are seeing it as a route for content. But this draws us back to the content point about doom scrolling, and is it all good? Is it all relevant? And clearly it's not. If anybody who's spent any time doom scrolling will realize it's not. But the chat is very interesting, how people are using it.
I think also, Sarah, that you just said, someone wouldn't go to a restaurant without using TikTok. Look at what Antonia's written. Older teens use it religiously, and when we went to Palace, they planned our trip with TikTok recommendations. But I think I love that second part of your comment, Antonia, that generation rely on it. So maybe we need to engage. Now, whether we engage with it as a tool or we engage with its purpose or approach or design, I think is a different question. I mean, what's your thoughts around that, Sarah?
I think, I mean, thank you, Antonio. That's really insightful. Great to hear that your teens used it, and that has become automatic for people like my colleague who would only go to a restaurant she'd seen on TikTok. But I think, going back to what we said earlier, TikTok has influenced how other social learning platforms have changed. So, there wasn't anything to do with YouTube Shorts. As you say, LinkedIn, you can now add a short video. So it has changed the way people operate with platforms, and we know that it is changing the way people are learning. And I think really it's about us being aware of those changes and how we can engage our Gen Z staff to work and to learn at work.
I think that really interesting comment from Gemma as well there. There's so much misinformation, especially in short form. I'm not sure what to trust. I think that begs a really interesting question, Gemma. So in the past, why did we trust other conversations? Why do we trust the person we're having a chat with at the coffee machine? Why do we trust the person we're at the photocopier with? Is there something different in terms of trust? It's just a thought.
It does throw up an interesting question about curation. At the beginning, the personalization and curation of content, and I think that's the driver behind it. We know, anybody who's used social media know that not all the content's legit, not all the content's truthful or on point, but when curated properly, can actually be incredibly powerful and very, very useful. So I think it's just about taking a look at it from a more holistic view about, the content itself might not be great, but it's the means of delivery, I think, is more the kind of the heavy point here.
Yeah, and Gemma's followed that up. I think the difference is the person at the coffee machine isn't pretending to be an expert. I think that's a really good point, Gemma. Are people on TikTok saying they're experts, or are they people just demonstrating their experience? I don't spend enough time on it. I mean, you guys do. Tell me, is that the case?
I think it's very mixed. So for me, as part of my kind of experiment of using, I'd not used TikTok until I started down this rabbit hole. So I kind of downloaded it and just to see what it was about, really. And the interesting thing with TikTok particularly is that the algorithms do drive content towards you, and it doesn't take a lot for that algorithm to shift. So for example, when I was doing it, I thought, well, one of the things I can learn of TikTok is I can see what the videos are for like PowerPoint animations. So I thought I'm gonna learn something new stuff about PowerPoint animations in the fact that I was building this slide deck, and I found some really helpful stuff. There was some really useful kind of short videos showing you how to do stuff. I'm like, that's cool. But then as you kind of like scroll through to the next things, all it takes is something else in the feed. And if you spend too long watching it, for example, a football video, your feed gets flooded then with other things that you spend time on. So I think the algorithms are kind of almost a danger. And this again, it comes back around to this point about curation and how you actually define the content and package it. I think is going to be important. But yeah, that's my experience on TikTok anyway.
I think with this whole subject area, one of the important things is, we've all changed how we learn. I love a podcast. I love a podcast. So in my private life and personal life, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and that's how I find information out. So I think it's about being able to give staff, employees, learners the opportunity to learn at work in the same way as they learn in their private life.
Absolutely.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
love it.
let's move on from TikTok and let's talk a little bit about Gen Z then. So their differences and why is it relevant? Now, I just want to kind of do a proviso here. This is not this kind of stats that's come out about Gen Z. It's not a absolute generalization of Gen Z or all Gen Z are in that category. These are just some stats that come out that I found quite interesting. One of the biggest ones is the fact that Gen Z are now in the workforce. They actually are in the workforce. This is only going to increase. As it stands right now, I think about 30% of the global population is Gen Z. So 27% of the global workforce will be Gen Z by the end of this year, and the absolute largest proportion in 10 years' time. So that should be quite a sobering thought for anybody who's a learning leader, that they are going to become one of your biggest audiences. So we've used that, and I'm like that somebody called out, don't do the digital native stereotype. You'll notice I put it in kind of inverted commas there, because it is a terminology that's thrown around a lot, but there is some truth to it. In fact, they've grown up with technology. Kind of, I think one of the phrases I used recently was they've grown up with a phone in their hand. They were born with a phone in their hand. It's kind of, they've been used to having nothing but that. If you step back into millennials, even millennials were having to kind of adjust to different types of technology. Mobile phones existed, but not smartphones when they started. So, it's the first time where that kind of smart technology, instant access to everything, high-speed internet has just been the norm, and they don't know anything different. So interesting point here about that 75% of US and European Gen Z say their device of choice is smartphone, and 98% of them own one. So you can see how TikTok has kind of had an impact on that in terms of scrolling content. And this is a point that's coming back to something that Sarah already said about, access to speed. If it's too hard to navigate, it's too slow to load, they lose interest. It's kind of like that persistence is not there with it. It's got to be technology when they use it has got to be fast and frictionless. It's got to be there then or when they want it. And their approach to content consumption is also a major shift, I think, from previous, which is now 70% use short form video as a primary source of news. So it's not, sitting and watching the news or reading a book or reading the papers or anything like that. It's not really a thing. And here's an interesting which came from Microsoft Canada, where they did a study around generational time on screens. So this, again, is a point you made earlier, Sarah, about, screen time. It's literally reducing with every generation. And Gen Z's attention span is, approximately, again, a bit of a generalization, but is 8 seconds compared to millennials and Generation X. So it's just coming down all the time, which I think is quite an interesting fact. I'm not saying anything or reading anything into this, but the average attention span of a goldfish is 8 seconds as well. So I'm not casting any aspersions whatsoever at Gen Z about that, but it is, they are decreasing. It's more about that the content needs to be right here, right now, and I think that's the important bit. You got anything to add to that, Sarah?
I agree with you. It's a sweeping generalization, but we need to work with it. If those are the facts, as L&D people, we need to work with it, and we need to make sure that we're giving people what they need. And if it needs to load quickly, then fine. As Andrew said, music videos, introductions on Spotify, they're now 8 to 12 seconds, and that's for a reason.
For sure.
Got to keep people engaged.
It's always about engagement, always. So some of their approaches to learning then. Okay, some of the stats, extremely comfortable absorbing knowledge digitally and online rather than in traditional institutions, the less engaging. The reason why I kind of like picked this one up was I kind of did a little bit of a straw poll. It was my son that did it. He's currently doing a management development program as part of his employment, and a lot of his learning is online, but even in the form of online seminars using Teams and such. And he's just not that engaged with it. He does it and he engages occasionally, but he's not fully engaged with it. Whereas the short form content there, he's just lapping it up. He absolutely loves it. That kind of content on demand when he's actually in his job and actually taking bits, he laps that up. So yeah, interesting. And he was basically, I know he's anecdotal, but it was like, all my mates are the same. They do the same kind of thing. So another quite interesting stat about Gen Z is that a short form video is a gateway to their curiosity. So they're actually 58% of Gen Zers use short form video as a catalyst for learning more, which I think is kind of sits into this whole concept of teasers and actually getting people interested in catching their attention very early. This came up in the chat actually around trust areas and whether content was, and I think we circled around it a little bit earlier. But actually, quite interesting. Gen Z happily use AI-driven platforms, but they actually do have some concerns about accuracy and bias, which I think is interesting that they're actually kind of seeing that in some of the broader content itself. So again, interesting stats in here that they're happy to do it and have that curation, but they don't fully trust it, which is interesting. So there's an element of doubt in their minds already. And nearly all of Gen Zers surveyed set aside at least 1 hour's worth of time each week for learning. I think that's the important word there is worth. It's not a 1 hour of learning, it's 1 hour's worth. So it could be spread out in a video here or a piece of content there. It's kind of, but they do set it aside. And nearly half of them reckon then their preferred method of learning is online rather than kind of face-to-face. However, they also, in addition to that online learning, 80% utilize social and collaborative study formats, specifically through platforms for peer interaction. So there's some really, really interesting stats about how Gen Z actually approach learning. Anything you want to add, Sarah?
I think just back to what I said, which is, across all generations, everybody learns in a slightly different way. But if our workforce is growing and we have plenty of Gen Z people coming into the workforce, we need to make sure that we've got everybody engaged in whatever form. So if it is short form videos, if it is social learning, if it is short pieces of learning in a TikTok style, then we need to make sure it covers everybody as well.
Absolutely. Cool. So I guess this brings us on to some of the kind of questionnaires we've been picking up now. So how can we leverage this information in our learning strategies? And I think you've touched on it pretty well there to begin with about modalities and content. So I think one of the interesting questions for me is around technology now. So how we actually use technology for learning. So what's your experience of learning technology, Sarah? What do you kind of like encounter and kind of get on with the best?
So as I've said before, love a podcast. I love a podcast and I like learning in different ways. I like audio and I like visual. With my customers, we're finding more and more of people wanting short form video, whether it is as a teaser, almost like a marketing teaser into, coming soon. This is a course that's coming soon, or is it a recap of a longer module? So I very much see that's the way my customers are wanting content to be created. So people have options.
I think it's true. I kind of mean technology for me learning personally. I mean, I do like a collab, face-to-face collab. I think there's a place for that, and it's really, really valuable. But I don't know whether that's to do with my generation or experience. But I also love sometimes I can just sit and just watch a video. My attention span's a bit longer. I'm happy to watch like a 10-15 minute video I've used YouTube numerous times to learn how to do things. In fact, my learning story is from during lockdown, which I think everybody was either tried to learn something during that. I learned how to do some better Indian cooking and Punjabi cuisine, all from YouTube, literally all from YouTube, from nowhere else. Just watching videos how to make them, and now I make a pretty mean curry, I think. Anyway, proof is in the eating, I guess. But yeah, I mean that's part of it for me is around technology is going to be important about how it fits. So what about content then? I think content's an interesting area because how do we deliver our learning now? There's a lot of kind of organizations still kind of not. I think a lot of people not thinking about this short form style. What do you think? Do you think it's like what? Do you think kind of there is a shift towards it, generally speaking, across organizations, or is it just Gen Z driving it themselves?
I think I've found it as there is a shift towards it. I work with a large police force who need to have a module that everybody takes, but then they need a 90-second video. As someone says, at 2 a.m. back of the kebab shop, what do they actually need to know to make sure that they follow the right procedures?
Yeah, and I think it's that that just-in-time learning, isn't it? That's kind of
Yeah.
It's what I think what's driving a lot of this is the need and people's recognition that sometimes they don't want to sit and do 2 hours of learning because when will it be relevant? Will they remember it? Are they actually be able to put it in place? Whereas actually that point of need, and it's not even, it's sometimes it's just a reminder, like the case you're using about, that environment where you think, gosh, how do I manage this? How do I deal with this right here, right now? Having access to that kind of content is what's kind of driving a lot of it, because I think we're all recognizing that, sometimes if I use even like technology, like systems use, I use PowerPoint and TikTok as my great example here. Because I've not done the animation on slides for quite a while. I was like, is there anything new in there? Is there something, other different ways of doing it? I learned some stuff because I was like doing it at the point that I needed it, and I learned what I needed there and then. And then that's kind of like driving it. But I also think the other important thing is about curation. We talked about quality of content, haven't we? So curation. What do we define as curation? Is it kind of control, or is it just the algorithms? I find it's an interesting subject to go on, and I think it's that personalization of content is going to become increasingly important. Do you kind of experience this?
So for me, personalized learning journeys are really important. Giving somebody the opportunity to, obviously people have to do their mandatory courses, but to then pick and choose what they want to learn, and allowing people to have some micro learning, some short courses that they can choose what they want to do. I think is great. And curated content, as we said in slide one, how much data is there out there? There's a crazy amount, but as learning leaders, being able to share some of that with our teams is a good thing to do. So curation is important.
Cool. I think we've got some kind of specific takeaways from this. So we've got some key takeaways from like the things, the research that we've done and what we've looked at, and kind of some of the solutions that our customers are demanding. And I think this is kind of like the key messages we want to send out. So I think the first one is about reviewing your current technology. Is it actually fit for the future? Do you have the facility to actually do this? Because a lot of organizations won't have the technology to be able to deliver this short form content. And actually existing content. And I think this is almost like the important bit for me is like, look at what existing content you've got and how you deliver it. You need to look at it from a different angle across the board. So what do you think about those 2 points, Sarah?
Obviously technology is key. You've got to have the platforms, and you've got to have the ability to create or to serve up that micro learning in a good fashion. Look at your existing content from a different angle. I'm sure everybody's got great content, but does it need to be an hour long? Does it need to be 2 hours long? If it's a piece of e-learning, chunk it down into bite-sized learning. Even add a couple of videos in, or create a couple of videos, or add create a program of learning with it. You can add add a blog into it, or add some videos into it. So there's multiple different short stages that people can go into, rather than that, I've got this course, it's an hour and a half long. Make it bite-sized learning.
I think even especially with digital as well, people, it's that concept of e-learning. If you're delivering a 2-hour e-learning course, I don't think anybody really enjoys those, do they? It's that kind of, not unless it's a subject they're already interested in. So I think that comes back down to this whole curation and personalization, using social tools a little bit more to help people kind of like do that. And actually, for me, part of this is the ability to be able to deliver rapid content. If you've at the point of need, and this is going to enhance performance ultimately. So going on to your following point, I think is this one about maximizing engagement. And I think this for me is like the real important message. I noticed I'm kind of picking up on a few of the questions in there about, I've got mixed age ranges, how do we cater them all? Well, it's obviously a massive challenge. It is a massive challenge, but I think the important messaging is it's about maximizing that engagement by using mixed formats, and really kind of fighting to try and get some of the short form stuff in there, because you will engage, from the stats that are showing it, that Gen Z will engage more with that. And lastly, I think this is also utilizing, Sarah mentioned about this earlier, but kind of like teasers. So actually, Gen Z really kind of fit into this concept of loving clickbait and teasers about stuff. It's a gateway to learning for many people, and I think we don't, as learning organizations and as leaders, we don't use this kind of stuff enough. We don't kind of get people excited about learning, and I think it's important to utilize some of these social media tactics. Get them interested, hook them in. It's like you go watch a movie, you see a movie trailer. It's the same kind of concept. You watch the movie trailer, it might be a minute long, and you go, actually, that looks interesting, I'm going to go see that. And then you go invest 2 hours to go see it. I know we're talking entertainment, but the concept's very, very, very similar.
Yeah.
So which do you think is the most important?
Absolutely.
I was going to say, which one do you think is the most important for you, Sarah?
I think they're all important, Peter. For me, technology is key. You've got to have the right technology to be able to serve this up. Content, is your content what people are going to engage with now, or do you need to just break it up and look at it in a micro learning way? And engagement, for me, it's all about engagement. 90% of people who come to us at NetX to talk about why they might need to do something different, it's about, we need to engage our staff. We need to engage people in the content. I've got lots of different examples of where we've done that as an organization, working with Häagen-Dazs a few years ago. They had terrible engagement, really poor engagement, and they wanted to turn everything into micro learning to be done on a phone across 38 countries. The only way to do it was in short form micro learning. Same with teasers. I've worked with a large London hospital who had a kind of a toolkit coming soon. We work with them to take a little snip out of the course and create a short video. They then, it's quite old-fashioned, put posters around the hospital with QR codes for people to access it. So again, it's the teasers. I'm old enough to remember when I went to university, I had a pile of prospectus this high. Now you go online and come to this university, it's great, and there's videos and there's this short information. So again, it's about engagement, and how are we going to engage everybody and every generation really. But as the Gen Z is swelling, we need to make sure that we keep people engaged and cut attrition. We don't want to lose staff, do we?
Absolutely not. I think it's interesting you mentioned universities. Some of them are at the game, and they're actually, there's a lot of universities on TikTok utilizing teasers to actually draw people in. So it's absolutely there. Yeah. So we've talked about technology, and there's a lot of tools out there, things like TikTok, and I'm not necessarily advocating using TikTok necessarily as a tool. You might be able to use it effectively, but do you want to kind of mention, be bereft of us to not mention NetX, one of the solutions that we put in place. We have a tool called Share, which is a very different way to engage learners. It's absolutely about leveraging expertise in an organization. And I picked up one of the questions in there about measurement. And I think that's quite an interesting point about, can you measure it? And I'm like, sometimes no, you can't, but that doesn't mean that the learning is not effective. And I know we're, as L&D, we're always kind of like having to justify our existence and provide stats behind it. But sometimes this multiple modalities is the way to kind of make it happen. What happens in the middle, whether it's super effective individually, is not always something that we can measure because it's so hard. The ultimate thing is, do people perform? And if you utilize different tools to help people perform, then I think that's the important part. So sharing itself is it's a social learning tool, very much driven by rapid delivery of content. It's focused very much into similar to a YouTube or Spotify style of doing things. It's put into formats of control and channels and expertise that you actually have in there. Allows your learners to directly access your content creators. And it's a kind of like an extra value. And if you want to curate it more closely and control it, you can do. Very simply, it works as 4 formats. You can create links out, whether that's both internally or externally. So anything that's been written there, you can create articles on there. You straight up cut and paste them, add documentation. So existing learning you've got, if you're in a rapid delivery format, that can do it for you. Also, video and podcast content. So if you've got your own video and podcasts, then you can upload them, use the platform to deliver it, or you can record directly a la TikTok style, directly off your phone through the app. You can do the audio and everything. It's fab. It's a really rapid way to deliver content. I think the main message is that it allows you to create multi-format learning very, very straightforward and quickly. So that's kind of, just want to kind of, we would be bereft not to mention that in this whole concept of us talking about TikTok and short form video and kind of how to engage people with short form learning. So I guess we're on to some of the questions, of which I've seen there are several in there.
Our audience always ask really smart questions, and there are so many questions sitting here. I've got some I've sort of like copied and pasted them out. There's a couple of really interesting ones. There's one I would love to ask from Elaine, which I think is a brilliant question. A couple of people have picked up on and said, with the older workforce remaining in work longer as the retirement age increases and retirement isn't enforceable, how do we balance accommodating boomers all the way through to Gen Z, this multi-generational workforce? I think it's a brilliant question. Whether you can answer this, guys, I don't know, but I'm just really interested in what are your thoughts around it.
I think I'd be a very wealthy man if I had the actual answer to that, but I can form an opinion. I think it comes down to this concept of multiple modality. You know, it's about having the tools and different styles of content in there. And I think part of it is looking at the content you've got, which goes back to one of the key points, is like, how do you deliver it now? So how do you deliver it now? What's the engagement like? If you're not getting engagement with that content, how can you deliver it differently or additionally? You know, it's about trying to give people different routes to learning. For me, I think that's the important message. I get the challenge. Honestly, I get the challenge. It really is difficult to find a direct solution for it. But I think it's, you know, ask your learners, I guess, is the first question. First thing I'll put back is, well, ask your learners, what do they want? Because you might, even if you have a heavy Gen Z in your organization, they might not want to learn like that. I saw an interesting stat recently about engineers. So multi-generationally, engineers prefer longer form content. And that's just a thing. So it depends your organization and the learners. So I think that's my immediate response is ask your learners what they prefer, but try multiple modalities seems to be the solution.
Cool. Anything to add to that one, Sarah?
Completely agree. It's not a one size fits all. Ask your learners and just consider how you can repackage some of the content you already have. And by using a content curation tool like Share, reading around the subject for me, I think that's how it really works well. So different elements around the subject and being able to get some relevant information to people quickly rather than having to create a whole e-learning or face-to-face facilitated course.
Yeah, absolutely. And Anne picked this up in the chat. She said we're finding people want critical to them and not the, oh, that's nice. They want to skip to the good part. They want to get to the, what's the bit that I need to know in order to help me do my job bit, which I think is where these tools work really well. It's interesting because there's a comment from John, which also in the chat, but also goes back to comment from Julie as well. So Julie was saying, senior leadership team and older generation, we've got this generational gap. We've got John saying, how's critical thinking facilitated by TikTok? I don't think that it is facilitated by TikTok. What it is it's just a way of delivering a small chunk of information which people then have to work around. I think we forget that this isn't going to be the answer to everything. It's one tool in the toolbox, which you then build other stuff around. I mean, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. For me, I love a program of learning with multiple different areas into it, whether some's face-to-face, some's e-learning, some's short form. I think that's what works really well because it grabs people's attention in different ways.
Yeah. Cool. Great question from Rachel is where short TikTok style learning, so not TikTok itself, but that style learning is completed, how do you measure skills growth and how do you look at, is it down to the channel that it was done? How do you see that it's been embedded? What are your thoughts around that? Is that an issue with the design or is it more than that?
That is a very interesting question, and I think it's the eternal question, the eternal L&D question, isn't it? How do you measure the impact of learning? It's the constant that's been there since the dawn of learning actually was defined as a thing, and I think it's almost impossible to measure to some degrees. I think certain skills you can measure directly where there's a causality effect to direct learning. For example, sales training. If you would do sales training before that, people's sales rates go up, then there's an argument to be had that's causality, but I think it's difficult. I think the question for me is more about what's the outcome anyway, not necessarily the means or the of delivery. It's what's the output. Is performance improved? Because as organizations, that's kind of what we're aiming for, isn't it? We want performance to be improved and or enhanced. And if you have multiple tools delivering that, then it's working. I think we can get a bit too granular, I think, sometimes in learning. As much as we'd love to, honestly, again, like I said, I'd be a very rich man if I knew the answer to that evaluation assessment piece. It's just, I think it's almost impossible.
I could sit here and then start advertising the stuff that I do around evaluation, but it wouldn't be appropriate. So there we go. What I will do is I will take us to our wrap up. I just want to say thanks, guys, because that was. You were talking about this, and I know we've had conversations before we did the session. You were going, have we got enough content to fill an hour?
Yeah, we could do about another 30 minutes doing questions, I think, actually.
We could do another 30 minutes. The questions are amazing, and we're not going to get to them today, guys. Apologies for that. However, you've got Sarah's details. If you look on the left-hand side of the page, you've got Sarah's LinkedIn and her email. You've got Peter's LinkedIn and email as well. Please do connect with them. You've got my LinkedIn as well, so if you want to connect with me, feel free. But please do connect with them and ask them these questions because it's all about that conversation. I love the dialogue and the conversation in the chat today. It's always like we've got the session running and then we've got the chat, and just the two, they're connected but different. And a massive thank you to everybody for all of the things that all your conversation in the chat. There is an email in for NetX, so if you want further information, please go back and connect with the NetX. And there's also a link to what does the future of L&D look like. Landing page, click on that and you'll get all of the other information. Casey, thank you. It's amazing session. I know, weren't the guys great? Thank you. Great session. Exactly. Look at this. Everybody's saying great stuff. Please do connect with Peter and Sarah if you have any further questions around this, or you just want to investigate. I mean, that question that you put in there, that last question you put in there, Mariana, love it. Absolutely love it. And please do engage and catch up with people. I'm going to close the doors in a moment. Thank you, everybody, for being here. The recording will be available. The links are clickable now if you want to click on them. but you also have all the details through in the recording, which will come out to you. You should receive a link to that tomorrow. The latest it will be Monday. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Like I said, I can't tell you who I'm going to be with because I don't know yet. We're still waiting for that to happen. We're just waiting for the diary to be confirmed. But for the 100+ people of you been in the room today, awesome conversation. Please enjoy the rest of your day. And we will speak to you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Speak to you soon.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.